Miss Tammy is reporting from Florence at the Santa Maria Novella Basilica. Listen to the music. You might recognize it, unless they're changing it now. I think they switched songs, but they were playing Ravel, Bolero. Surely y'all recognize that. Anyway, so this is one of several many famous churches here in the area. And if you look very carefully, Pamela is on that bench lying down relaxing just like she always does. This is Miss Tammy reporting from the Santa Maria Novella, the Spanish chapel. This is the fresco called the Triumph of St. Thomas Aquinas. And one day Charlotte Mason sat here and she was looking up here at the Holy Spirit descending from heaven like a dove. And who is she descending to? Well, in that group of people, watch it descend. In that group of people in the middle, in blue, you see Mary, of course, the mother of Jesus. And then you also see the man who's taller, that would be St. Peter. And then surrounding them are the apostles. And then down here are depicted pagans and people who are waiting to hear about Christianity. And you see the man knocking at the door, waiting for someone to enter. And if you look closely on the ground, you'll even see dogs, because, even the dogs are waiting to hear from Christ. You can throw bones at them and learn the good news. And so as she was sitting here looking, she's thinking, okay, that makes sense. The Holy Spirit comes down, and then through the work of the church, we spread the good news to all. But then she began to think more deeply. And so these 7 flying beings represent the 7 virtues. And so you have in red in the middle, that's the greatest, which is charity or love. And of course, red makes sense. And then to her left is faith. Faith is wearing white. And then to her right is hope. And those are the 3 virtues that Paul talked about. And then going from left to right, you see temperance, prudence, justice, and fortitude, which were also considered the 7 virtues. And you can even think of these as habits. And if you'll notice too, all of these beings, if you look online, you can see what the symbols mean. So who's in the middle? That's St. Thomas. And he was a great Dominican doctor of the church. And at his feet are seated 3 men who represent heresies. The heresies were the men who had the heresies were Nestor, Arius, and Navarreros. And then you'll notice these people sitting next to them. Well, these represent great people of the Old Testament. And so on the right, I'm not sure what I'm doing on the video. Okay, on the left, you see Job, and then David holding a lyre. And then St. Paul, who wrote so many letters in the New Testament, and then 2 gospel writers, St. Mark and St. Matthew. Of course, think about it. The virtues are being explained by these people, and who's helping them understand? Well, what was at the very top of the painting? That was the Holy Spirit coming down, teaching the teachers, right? Which all of us, parents and adults, we are teachers. So then on the right, you see in red, on the very right, you see in red, let's see, who is that? That's Solomon. And then next to him is Isaiah. And then in blue is Moses. And if you look at a detail of the painting, you'll see he has the horns just like the Moses that Michelangelo painted. And then there is two gospel writers, St. Luke and St. John. And so this is a great picture of people who have passed on the good news before Christ was born, as well as after Christ was born. And so this you can think of as a picture of education, right? But in a minute, we're going to go down and we'll see some more interesting things about education. So going from left all the way to right, you see these women. Well, these aren't women. They're muses. There are 14 muses, and if you think about the Iliad at the very beginning, Homer says, "Sing to me, muse," because he wants to be inspired. And so they're trying to imagine, how are we inspired? Obviously, the Holy Spirit, but we are inspired in different areas of learning. And so on the very left, you see has to do with religious learning. And I think I'm going to focus on the great people here. Oh, and then on the right, this is the 7 liberal arts that was taught in classical education. And so this would be more secular type subjects. And then I think, because I'm trying to watch what the video was and restate what I had explained earlier. So I guess I'll just explain here unless I shift over. We'll find out. So I'll just keep explaining. So what you see here are the secular liberal arts, and there are 3 on the right, which are the trivium, and those are the basics that a student would learn first. On the very end is grammar, and then in red, that's Cicero, representing rhetoric, which is speaking, and then dialectics. And we don't really know who represents dialectics and grammar. And that would be the foundational piece. And then we have the quadrivium, I don't know how to say that. Pythagoras, he is the one underneath the woman in yellow for arithmetic. Euclid for geometry. And then if you look at the man looking up, that is Ptolemy for astronomy. And then the guy who kind of looks like a caveman, that's Tubal-Cain for music. And those were the higher level subjects that were taught in classical thinking. Another interesting thing about this is, notice there are lots of pagans here. And that was a very interesting feature of Charlotte Mason's philosophy, that there's no separation between secular learning and sacred learning, that we can learn from truth from various sources as long as this lines up with the truth that God has taught us through the scriptures. So especially in the next part, you're going to see people who we think of as pagan right next to people that we think of as Christian. And so on the very left represents civil law. That would be Justinian, because he wrote codes of law that kind of changed, brought order into government. And then the next guy is a Pope, Clement V. Then he represents canonical law, the law of the church. Now here's the next one, the guy holding the red book in blue outfit. That is Aristotle for philosophy. Aristotle was a pagan. He was alive 300 years before Christ, and yet he's here. And then the Holy Scriptures is St. Jerome. He's the one that translated the Bible into the Latin Vulgate that the church read for many, many years. And then now some of these are obscure. For theology is St. John of Damascus. Contemplation, St. Dionysius the Areopagite. I don't know how to say that, Pagite. And then preaching would be St. Augustine, which was a monk. According to Charlotte Mason, God doth instruct in the things of science, in the things of art, in the things of practical everyday life. His God doth instruct him, and doth teach him. Her God doth instruct her, and doth teach her. Let this be the mother's key to the whole of the education of each boy and each girl, not of her children. The divine Spirit does not work with nouns of multitude, but with each single child. Because he is infinite, the whole world is not too great a school for this indefatigable teacher. And because he is infinite, He is able to give the whole of his infinite attention for the whole time to each one of his multitudinous pupils. We do not sufficiently rejoice in the wealth that the infinite nature of our God brings to each of us. And what subjects are under the direction of this divine teacher? The child's faith and hope and charity, that we already knew. His temperance, justice, prudence, and fortitude, that we might have guessed. His grammar, rhetoric, logic, music, astronomy, geometry, arithmetic, this we might have forgotten, if these Florentine teachers had not reminded us. His practical skill in the use of tools and instruments, from a knife and fork to a microscope, and in the sensible management of all the affairs of life, these also come from the Lord, which is wonderful in counsel and excellent in working. His God doth instruct him and doth teach him. Let the mother visualize the thought as an illuminated scroll about her newborn child, and let her never contemplate any kind of instruction for her child except under the sense of the divine cooperation